G'day viewers, how are we doing? As part of the Train Sim World 6 November roadmap, there was a discussion on texture pools and why they have blurry textures from Matt. Now I thought before we get into that, I might give you a little bit of explainer of what the texture pool actually is. It's present in Unreal 4 and in Unreal 5, so 5 won't be an answer for this. It's known as the texture pool or the texture streaming pool, and it's a virtual memory container which is located in the GPU's VRAM. That's dedicated to holding the texture data currently used by the texture streaming system, and that's what actually brings you the visuals in a game. It's typically in the VRAM. On consoles, this can be a little bit of a different story, because on console you've got your main block of memory, or the actual block of memory, but within that is the VRAM, and the VRAM can shrink or grow depending on the needs, and the memory available for the application, the game, can shrink and grow. Excuse my dirty hands, I was firing yesterday. That shit just doesn't come off. In PC, they're quite separate. So the GPU has VRAM, and if you're in the 4080 series, for example, you've probably got, 16 gig, I think, and Supers have 24, and 90s have, it's more, is it 32, I think, something like that. But, and if you've got a 60 series, well, probably should have saved up for the previous version's 80, but anyway. So the core purpose of it is to manage memory efficiently by only loading the necessary resolution bitmap of a texture into VRAM based on the texture's distance from the camera and its visibility on the screen. Now that's really important, because what that means is if you're looking at something that's up close, it will be really high resolution. And if you're looking at something that's a long way away, it will be a much lower resolution, because that's all that's needed, because you don't need to see the detail of things a long way away. What's happening in the game is sometimes things that are up close are getting the low resolution bitmap instead of getting the high resolution bitmap that we expect. And that basically means that the pool has run out. It's just joggers. So essentially the way it is the pool acts as a budget for all the textures that need to be in memory. Instead of loading the highest resolution of every texture in a level, which would quickly overwhelm your VRAM, the streamer dynamically decides which level of detail to load for each texture to maintain visual quality without exceeding the pool size. Textures in most 3D applications are stored with a chain of pre-calculated lower resolution versions called bitmaps. The streamer loads the appropriate bitmap into the pool. So that's what we were talking about with things. If it's a long way away, it's low resolution. If it's close, it's supposed to be a higher resolution. The purpose of that is to minimize how much memory you're chewing through. The pool over budget warning. If the total memory required for all the high-resolution textures visible in the scene exceeds the size of the texture pool, Unreal Engine will trigger a warning. To compensate, the engine is forced to load lower-resolution bitmaps for some textures, which can result in noticeable blurry or low-resolution textures popping in. Now, this happens to a lot of games. It's not unique to Train Sim World. It can happen to a lot of them. And it's generally, to be honest, careless development that causes this issue. But it can also be an excess of the size of a scene. So you may have noticed in Mittenwald Barn, for example, when you look down from the heights, it's foggy. And the reason it's foggy is to reduce the resolution so that you don't have to have high resolution textures, even though you can see them. So there's tricks you can do to make it better. And the latest prevalence of really highly detailed routes is what's actually one of the key contributors, I think, to causing this issue. That said, we'll watch the scene in a moment, but Matt did come clean that perhaps there are some things in the texture pool that don't actually need to be in there, and they're being held over. Matt does talk about the 2D map still being there from the route selection screen, for example. So if all those 2D maps from all the routes are in there, that's probably quite a lot of memory. Now, you can adjust the pool size. Well, you can on PC anyway. It's often fairly small, somewhere between about 1 gig up to about 2 gig, and that's to maintain compatibility with lower end hardware. For projects with high resolution textures, you may need to increase it. I don't know what Train Sim World has it set to, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's higher than a gig. And you can put it in your default engine.ini. I might actually give that a go, because I've got an 80 series card, so I've got 16 gig of VRAM, so I could potentially push it up and see if the issues do disappear. That would be interesting to me. But anyway, let's watch the segment with Matt and Alex.
But let's also talk about some other key topics that have been in the community from our Q&A, and we will look at other Q&As. There have been some from our thread that I want to talk through. But before we do that, I really want to talk about some of the top topics. And there are various big topics in the community, and I know various people have different opinions on each of them. But I like to think some of these are really key ones that we can start with. And if there's anything that you want us to talk more deeply in at more than just a quick Q&A answer, then we'll do that in an upcoming roadmaps and maybe some Q&As that we've been hosting in our Discord as well. I want to start with blurred
He'll hate me for that.
We have been talking about blurry textures and some things appearing less detailed when you're looking at them in Train Sim World. We have been talking about this appearing on certain add-ons and certain bits of content in the past. This has been something that we've noticed, and this isn't the first time, or this isn't a new thing with Train Sim World 6.
Now, this is true because I read CSX Heavy Haul the other day and we saw it. So it's been around since the original release back in 2017, March, I think. So it's certainly not a new issue. And I think careful development has kept it at bay for the most part. But lately, the level of detail in the routes is so high that we're seeing it more and more. But there may also be other reasons, as we're about to find out.
And I think it's worth us kind of starting the journey over again and talk about what makes these happen, where we're at, what are we doing about it as a team, and what solutions and resolutions we're trying, and how we're kind of attempting to implement those. Because I know the community have noticed more of them appearing. I think when it came to the conversation around Birmingham Crew and also the 5 circle timetable, again, that topic of blurred textures, and from the launch of Train Sim World 6, some players have still been noticing it, and it is something that I think has become more of a bugbear with players in the community. So we want.
Says some players have still been noticing it. Everyone does. Even on PC with relatively powerful hardware and a higher VRAM, you still get it from time to time. But it's really prevalent on the consoles.
We want to really detail that and give that a bit of a summary. So I think it'd be really great if you can kind of give us the context, Matt. I think that'd be really helpful, and then talk about what we've done and where we're at, if you'd be able to.
Okay. So memory is a really complicated topic because you feel like it's a pot that's this big, right? And you just put stuff in it, and when you run out, you run out. Unfortunately, it's not. It's broken up into different types of memory. So your GPU has memory, your main CPU, your main motherboard has memory. Some of that memory is actually shared between the two. And then you've got within there, then the Unreal maintains various pools inside various bits of that memory. So when we're talking about blurry textures, we're talking about something called a texture pool. The texture pool, if I recall rightly, lives in main memory, not GPU memory.
That's not actually correct. It lives in GPU memory in the VRAM.
And it's a fixed size pool where all of the textures are stored by Unreal. What happens is when that texture pool runs out, then Unreal takes those textures. Now, textures are designed to be at various different resolutions because, for example, if it's called a thing called a MIP, if the which is sort of the texture version of a LOD, if you know the word LOD. So if you imagine the texture gets further away from you on the screen, and you can obviously can't see it as much. He says putting his head closer to you, but you know what I mean. It's then you don't need as much. So what it does is it shows a lower MIP version of the texture. So what happens is that when the texture pool gets to getting full, what happens is it starts MIPing down the textures that are in memory to lower detail versions of.
Yeah, so there I think's where he's talking about what's in the main memory and what's in the texture pool. So the big group of textures is kept in your main memory, and what's actually being shown in the scene is what comes into the texture pool. So I guess he's kind of correct when he says that it's kept in the main memory, because the big group is there. Only what's shown is in the texture pool.
Them to sort of free up some memory for other textures to go in. Now, if you are up close to a texture that gets running one of its lower MIPS, that's what makes it look blurry. So that's the thing. It's essentially it's texture pool exhaustion that's coming in, and that's because too many textures, too big textures, those kinds of things that are going on.
Now, interestingly, the game does, or Unreal Engine does, issue a warning, but that's not visible to players. I don't know if it goes back in the telemetry to Dovetail. So Dovetail does have a certain set of telemetry which you agree to through the privacy statement when you first start up the game that lets them know what's going on. So whether they've got an idea of how widespread the issue is or not, I don't know. What Matt's saying is consistent with what we were told at the Ambassador event earlier this year.
And unfortunately, again, a texture pool is kind of designed to run full because obviously you want it showing as many different textures as possible. And so it's kind of when you're looking at it and you say, where are we running out? Why are we running out? Should we free some up? It's just like, well, if you free it up more, we'll load in.
Yeah, so that's sort of accurate, but it's also slightly disingenuous about the texture pool, because the texture pool has the textures needed to display the scene, so it loads in what you can see and probably a little bit around it, so it's not jittery when you move. So, okay.
It is designed to do that. So it's one of those things that's quite difficult to analyze because you've got to. It's more about prioritizing and making sure that the right things are being kept at high definition and so forth. Um, so that's what blurry textures. That's what causes blurry textures. And what where we are currently with them is we actually found a potential bug. We're in the process of proving out if it's actually an issue. We're at where when you go into the menu system, there is a 2D map, a schematic version of the map, and that's obviously all textures, right? Well, it seems like there's a bug that means that that texture load there is being kept in memory while you're playing the game.
Now, interestingly, is that just the one for that route, or is it all of them that were available to the menu? That's an interesting thing.
Right, so that's not good. It's not tons of memory, but it's probably enough. Certainly that the like a Series S, for example, is probably going to feel it.
Or a Gen 8's going to be totally balked by it, or a low-end PC for that matter. People running 3060s, potentially 3070s. I should just say XX60s and XX70s, really, because it's all of them. People running lesser hardware, it's going to be problematic if it's getting chewed up by things that don't need to be seen. I wonder, does that also mean there's other stuff from the menu left over in there?
So that probably isn't going to be a good thing if that proves that. I haven't had the results from the investigations yet to validate if that's actually been found to be the solution. If so, what it was. But if that is the case, that would probably point back to. I think there's a general consensus which I would tend to agree with, where at a certain point, maybe TSW late 4, earlier, sometime in early 5, the that was when kind of blurring became more of an issue.
More of an issue, because as we saw, it happens in the first version of the game, CSX Heavy Haul.
And I think that if that's the case, that would be something that would be like, okay, at some point a bug has been introduced that's left that in the memory. So we just need to make sure those get expunged before it goes in. So, so that's the current line that we're looking at, which could have a really good impact potentially. And as soon as we've got an output on that, obviously, if there's an improvement, we'll get that out to you. And then it's really sort of stepping back to what other things.
It's just vaguely amusing to me that Alex isn't actually listening to Matt. He's just responding to things in the chat and the roadmap stream.
Are we can we find in the texture pool, and then sifting through, in this particular scene, why are these in, what is the right thing being prioritized, and then going through a process of figuring that stuff out. So
yeah, so ideally you're going to want, probably in the order of priority, you want anything to do with a train up front. That's most important. Anything to do with an AI train that's part of the scene's probably next. Anything to do with the scene itself that's near to the player, like a station, is probably next. And then you've got everything else after that.
And that's a long drawn out process, unfortunately. And sometimes it's a case of actually, you know what, there's just too big textures in here.
Now that's a good point, because and this is where I say it needs careful, considered development, because if your textures are simply too high resolution to begin with, then you're just wasting the texture pool memory, essentially. And if you've got really massive ones, you might even end up kicking out textures that you need.
Here, and what we need is for to go back to the individual artists or developers of things, and actually get some of this stuff reworked to be more efficient in how it uses texture memory.
One thing I'm kind of curious about, and I don't know if such a tool exists, in graphic world it's very common to reduce the size of things. So if you're old enough that this isn't news, I'm sorry. In the original web, for example, we had enormous pictures. They were bitmaps, and every pixel had data available for it. And pictures on the web were either kept tiny or they just took a really long time to load. And then we got JPEG, which was run length encoding, which meant that they were shrunk effectively in the size they did, because not every pixel actually had a value. And if it was the same as the one next to it, then all it got was it's the same as the one next to it, or the next 50 are the same. And that was a useful way of reducing memory. More recently, we've had different forms like PNG and WebP that have reduced that even further again. That does mean that you get pictures that you can't zoom into. I'm curious if textures could be managed that way. Could, during the build process, it actually flag really massive textures and kick them out for rework, or bring them down in resolution so that they're more reasonable? I suppose the concept behind what I'm saying there is, if a texture is designed to be seen on, say, an 8K resolution monitor, and we know from hardware surveys that no one really runs at that kind of resolution, probably the best you're going to get is 4K. Most people are still running 1080, according to the Steam hardware survey and the console surveys. Most people still use 1080. Then it doesn't need to be all that high resolution.
So there's other discussions that will be going on in there first, but I think there's certainly the moment the majority of work going on in this is trying to work out, well, this map thing that's been identified, let's get that either fixed or proven not to be an issue, or we can and then we'll move on to more explorations, and then that, as I said, might come out to finding more route particular content specific changes.
Now that, to me, is a bit telling. That tells me there's only one person working on this. So while it's enough of a priority to talk about it, it's not enough of a priority to divert significant resources onto it, because if there was more than one person working on it, surely you'd know the answer to that question relatively quickly.
I feel it's mostly going to be more a core thing than content specific, but I'm not going to rule out content specific changes.
Yeah, so thinking if it's more of a core thing, that is some hope that through some core changes, it can be fixed universally. But Matt is calling out that content, i.e. DLCs, downloadable, might need updates as well.
GTA Sandman says that might explain why some TSW routes had no issues back then now have an issue. Exactly. It's kind of like that's one of the sort of the key sort of flags that we've been looking at is that like if it had all been just new content, then it could just be that the content teams have been more bold and putting more interesting, super detailed textures in things. But original content is suffering as well, which tends to suggest more of a core issue.
Yeah, it has been around forever, but it is more visible. I think that's the key, is it became more visible.
That's gone on there. So that's why we're prioritizing that stuff first.
That's a really good summary.
Well, that actually covers it for the blurred textures discussion anyway. It's excellent that there is some discussion from Dovetail on this, because I know silence is not what people want from this. They want more information, and I think that's fairly universal. It is a complex topic, and it is difficult, but we are talking about there was a discussion in this video that it's since late Train Sim World 4, early Train Sim World 5. What I have to ask as a player, and putting my ambassador hat aside, I suppose, as a player, I have to wonder, why has this gone on for the better part of 2 years? Why hasn't this been started to be addressed earlier? Why hasn't there been more of a priority on texture blurring? Now, for me, it doesn't actually affect me very much because, I run on PC, I run on relatively high-end hardware. I have the luxury of adjusting my texture pool if I choose to. Frankly, I don't. I don't change my engine settings because I want other people to see the game when I stream it in the way that they'll see it. But people on consoles have been talking about this a lot, and it is quite a prevalent issue. I get it on the Xbox S, definitely, to some extent on the X, not as much, but sometimes. On the PlayStation, I know the people that play PS5 definitely see it. PS4's definitely even more. So it's interesting that it's been around for a while. It affects a large part of the player base because we do have, I'm not going to say the knowledge, but we have the understanding that consoles are about 80% plus of the market. So if that much of the player base is affected, why hasn't this had a higher priority until now? So it's just an interesting question. I don't know the answer. I would encourage, and frankly, I talk to the people at Dovetail. I get on really well with them. I would certainly encourage that more priority is given to this, because in the world of gaming, visuals, then sounds, then gameplay is generally the priority of things that people want to see. So ignoring those games that pretend to be 8-bit. But, generally speaking, people want excellent visuals, they want excellent sounds, and they want excellent gameplay. And it's mostly in that order. Mostly. It's not for everyone, but mostly. So I'm just curious why it hasn't had a higher priority, why it hasn't had a higher recognition. To some extent, I think there's even been denial that the problem actually exists. And that has irked me a little bit since it started coming up, that it was happening. So hopefully there is a good resolution for it. Hopefully there is just something that's keeping or forcing things into texture memory that don't actually need to be there. Hopefully that is the answer. My gut feel is it's probably not simple. And I think in the wording and the language that was used here, I would suggest being prepared for a long wait. So I don't think there's an immediate answer coming up here. I don't think there is a solution just around the corner. I would hope that someone who's particularly experienced at texture pool issues is brought in to have a look at the problem. I think that would be a good way to go. And maybe that is what they've done, because, we don't have that visibility into what the organization actually does. Even though I know Matt, for example, and chat with him from time to time, you don't get the visibility in what a company does. It's just not how they work. Companies keep things to themselves because it's their commercial. It's usually referred to as commercial in confidence, but it's their IP. It's their way of working. That's what sets them apart from other places. So they tend to just not talk about great detail about what's going on in development. It's just not done. Alrighty. Well, that's it for this one. So no easy, quick answer for blurry textures, but at least we've got some more information. There is a recognition from DTG that it's important. I'm not 100% convinced that as a player, it's getting enough recognition yet. So what I'd encourage people to do is keep your voices heard. Get on Discord, get on the forums if you can stomach being there. But yeah, make your feelings heard. Report it when it happens. Let people know. Is it happening more on one route than another one? Does it happen more with some things than others? Now, one thing I would suggest, when I have seen it on the Xbox, it's mostly when I've gone from one route to another one. So sometimes you do see it just in one route when you boot up the Xbox and you run just that one route. Sometimes you do see it. But more often it's gone from one to another, which makes me think stuff's getting stuck in there and not coming out when you're changing routes. I really encourage people to reduce this kind of issue, to reduce crashing and reduce other gameplay issues, is first up, shut down your console at the end of every day. End of every play session, shut it down completely. Don't put it in sleep mode. It's like any computer. Shutting it down will clean it. The other thing I'd suggest is if you're going to go from one route to another one, I'm not going to tell you to do this every time, but if that's your style of play, consider actually exiting the game so the game stops between each one, so that it comes back and it's clean and you get the best possible experience. Anyway, that's it for now. If you want to chat about texture pooling or other issues, put them down below in the chat and we will see where we go. I don't have huge knowledge myself on this. I have talked to some Unreal people, so I do get the concepts behind it. Would I know how to go into the code and have a look? No, of course not. But happy to chat with you about it and try and at least bring your understanding to the same level I have if I haven't succeeded in doing that in this video. Alrighty, have fun, folks. Enjoy yourselves. As always, appreciate the lot of you. See you later.
We played a game.